The neat thing about time is a fantasy. Which means we have all the time in the world. Or you could say we might run out of time. What happens when you run out of time? You die? Actually, I was just filling up space till I had everybody's attention. So this was your quiz. There's only 2 questions I had questions about. This was a very hard question. The sun and the good are alike insofar as the good makes opinion possible, just as the sun makes sight possible. This refers to Plato. And this was embedded here in the lecture notes. Plato in the Republic uses the sun as a metaphor. The problem was, if you were to go up to here, he shows you that the beginning of understanding is false belief and true belief. Reason and intellect give you what he calls the sun or illumination so that we can know the real world, what's really real. And for him, he calls this the forms, which he never explains how to go there or verify that they're real or that they're really the perfect or the reality of what's really real in the world. So this was kind of a tricky question. You had to be able to go back here and put it together. I acknowledge that. Don't hold me to this. I have to think about whether I'm going to give everybody credit for this. This was kind of an obtuse one. This one was not so obtuse. The Eastern world trusts intuition and experience. And the note said that the Eastern world trusts intuition and connectedness, not experience. And that's why that was wrong. Okay? Everybody with me? Now, I went over it in class that we use reason experimentation in the West, and they use in the East, they use interconnectedness and intuition. Never brought up experience, just wondering if someone would see whether or not that was in the notes or not, because I know you data mine, you know, and that's okay. You can go back and find the information. Those are the only 2 that people did not do well on. Any questions about the quiz? Okay, good. So then today, let me get rid of this stuff for you. Today we want to talk about the Buddha. Does anybody know anything about the Buddha, who the Buddha was? Eastern philosophy is kind of strange to most of us. The Buddha literally means the enlightened one. This is what the good life is all about in the East. We're going to study Buddhism today, and on Thursday we'll do Hinduism, and then on, and then next week we'll study Taoism. We'll do Confucianism on Thursday, and then we'll study Hinduism and Taoism next week. And then we'll be done with the East by and large. They have the same world that we do, but they look at it differently. And when I bring some of this up, you're going to see that this isn't so different than the way we look at it. We just kind of focus on things a little differently. So the Buddha literally means the enlightened one who's come to the awareness of what life is really all about, and then they'll give us their rendition. Well, how different is this than Aristotle, moral virtue, or Kant, moral duty, or John Stuart Mill, the pursuit of happiness? It's really the same thing, only this conclusion is going to be different than we're used to, and I'll share it with you. The Buddha's real name is Siddhartha Gautama. You need to know that for your quiz. He was born into a very wealthy family. His father did the most that they could do to keep him from having to deal with what the rest of us experience in life, the hardships, the ups and the downs, the sicknesses and things like that. And they pretty well insulated him. When he became a younger man, he was able to leave home. He did that because he really wanted to know what life was about. This is kind of a philosophical reflection, trying to understand the meaning of life. So he went out and he became a minimalist. And after a long time being a minimalist, he realized that having nothing and having everything did not make him happy, that he really didn't see the real value in life. And so the Buddha leaves both wealth and not poverty, but minimalist. And he goes through this transition, and he comes to what he calls the 4 Noble Truths about what life is really all about. And it's based in suffering, and I'll explain that to you in detail. You'll see all these details. This is nuts and bolts that you'll see on your quiz. And he says the way out of this 4 Noble Truths is the Noble Eightfold Path. It's how he suggests might be a path to lead us to enlightenment, to become like he did. The Buddha is very interesting. He said, don't do what I did. You have to find your own way. But there is a path. And if you follow the path, if you understand the nature of the path and you get on the path, then you might well find yourself at a state of what he called nirvana, or the enlightened one. I use oftentimes a metaphor for Eastern thinking that life is like a river flowing. Of course, we take all our rivers and we change them. The Mississippi River for a long time went like this, and it did that for a reason. In nature, rivers never run a straight course because nature requires that kind of makes mid-course corrections. Well, when you go down the Mississippi River from the northern country all the way down to the Delta down in Louisiana, if you have to travel like this in barges trying to bring goods down there, it takes a lot of time. So we send our Corps of Engineers in there and they just straighten great parts of it out. What happens then is when the snows melt in the north and they come down, they don't have a place to deposit their water. So they just rush right down the river and we flood everything around us. We have these major floods and disasters. Nature took care of it. You still have floods with nature, but nature takes care of it. Oftentimes, that's how the river flows. Finds the path of least resistance and flows from higher to lower. Gets down here, turns into moisture, comes back up here, it rains, and follows the path all the way down again. Once in a while, the river will change direction. It adds some things to it. There are little places here that we call eddies. Do people know what eddies are? An eddy's like a little resting place. If you ever watch a twig go down a river, it might get caught up in an eddy, and it'll just rotate for a while, but eventually the current will take it out, and it'll find another eddy over here, and it'll rotate for a while. What would they mean by life is like a river flowing? Well, you see, when you pop out of the womb, you start down the river. And then sooner or later in life, you encounter an eddy. Maybe we'll call this first divorce. And you need a little time out. And then you get back on track and you get to another eddy, and we'll call this second divorce, you know. And then you flow down here, and this is called war, and you get drafted. And life just kind of goes the way life's supposed to go. So for the Easterner, the mindset is that life is like a river flowing. Maybe there's some things about life that we should get in touch with. I was talking to Professor Mukherjee. She was born in India, and we talk about this every once in a while, how nature is in perfect harmony, even when it blows its top like volcanoes or it has hurricanes. It always rebalances itself. And that's how the Easterner looks at it. He looks at nature, she looks at nature, and she sees the interconnectedness about everything. One drop in the lake is connected to every other drop in the lake. You drop a stone in the lake, and it eventually the energy goes out until it's almost minuscule when it gets out to the edges, but the energy is transported throughout everything that's in that ecosystem. Does everybody kind of follow that? We don't live like that. Well, you all don't live like that probably for the most part. It's a mindset. Our mindset is very rapid, very much doing. Everything is geared to getting us faster and faster and faster. It's the same world. It's just a different way of looking at it. That being said, let me at least introduce you to the Buddha and the wisdom of the Buddha. The Buddha says that truths are to be reflected on. They're not absolute and unchangeable like we have learned so far in Plato's metaphysics, that the forms are unchangeable. After all the life that the Buddha had lived, he came to the fundamental truth that life is about suffering. And that suffering is called dukkha, and you will see dukkha on your quiz. Well, think about it. It's not that all life is suffering, but life is filled with suffering. Like falling off a 2-story building, getting run over by a 6,000-pound van, almost drowning 3 times, stage 4 cancer. Well, that didn't occupy most of my life, but it certainly has permeated my life. There is the presence of suffering in the world. It's wrong to own the suffering. It happens to us, but we don't take ownership of it according to the Buddha. We admit it exists and it affects us, and then you can disassociate yourself from it without owning it. So I tell the story how I faced death almost 10 times, and people will look at me and they have various explanations for it, like someone must be looking out for you. I don't know why I have to go through so much suffering. If someone's looking out for me, you think I could avoid some of it, but of course I take that suffering and I tell people the safest place in the world is right here or right here, because I seem to have a target right here, and even though it doesn't extinguish me, it doesn't seem to hit many other people besides me. Trying to make the best out of the life that surrounds us and that happens to us. The Buddha says the suffering comes in 5 areas. Birth is suffering, not only for the mother, but for the child. It's a tremendously traumatic experience. Age is suffering. Most of you haven't gotten there yet, but you'll figure that out before too long. Sickness is suffering. Disassociation from the loved ones is suffering. We all have suffered the first love, or many of us have suffered the first love, and that hurts. It hurts a lot. And we try and disassociate from it. You may find later on in life that as you get further into life, you may have more disappointments. You wish you could kind of go back to something that was very successful and felt good. And you can't go back. I had my brother suggested I get online with, these classmates.com and go back to when we graduated high school, and they want you to put a photo on. So I put a photo on, and evidently someone I dated that I forgot about recognized me and said, "Oh, I remember you. You look just like you did in high school, only older." And I thought, isn't that interesting that her recollection is, well, if you were to think of that, or maybe you just need more years to get into that, but you reflect on things and people look the way you remember them, and then you meet them in real life, and it's like, I wouldn't have picked you out of a crowd, because the reflection is the old reflection. And then finally, not getting what one wants is suffering. You work hard for a promotion, the boss gives it to his cousin or niece, and that hurts. You work hard for an A in this class, and you're going to get an 89.4, and that's really a B. And if you end up with a B, that's going to hurt, because you're only 0.6 of a point away from an A, and you worked hard to get the A, and you just fell a little short. And so the Buddha says this is the origin of suffering in these 5 areas: birth, aging, sickness, disassociation from loved ones that we have, and finally not getting what you want. Now, it's important to understand the Buddha doesn't focus on suffering. The Buddha says suffering is a part of life. It's going to happen, like it or not. And it doesn't have to come in major forms either. You're running somewhere because it's important, you get a flat tire. Something happens and it just doesn't work out the way you want to. Life is about suffering, says the Buddha. The key to overcoming suffering is not getting attached to it. It's when we grasp onto it. It's like when we can't let go. We make things more important than they are now, because back then they were very important. So Buddha says the key, once we understand the origin of suffering, is attachments to certain things in this life. Attachments to food, to music, to desire to be something, and the desire to get things out of life. The Buddha says life keeps going. It doesn't wait for us. Sometimes we benefit greatly from it, and oftentimes we don't. And if we can't let go of that suffering, then that suffering plagues us. So Buddha said then, once we understand there's suffering in the